Welcome everyone, and thank you for coming to this roundtable on sharing experiences on debt audits. So this is hosted by Research for Action, which is a workers' cooperative that was set up about a year ago by Joel, who sat there, Vika, who has just arrived and will be joining us on the panel in a second. She does have a very good reason to be late. Reason is about 6 months old at this point and not very good at falling asleep without her. Yeah, this research cooperative had been a pipeline for a little while, really, because we wanted to set up an organization that would enable us to develop independent research that would be meaningful for us and useful for anybody, really, who's campaigning on social, economic, or environmental justice. And we wanted this to we wanted to have a sustainable way of doing this as well. Previously, we had been working together as Debt Resistance UK, which is more of a sort of campaign organisation, and Research for Action's current kind of main project that we've got some funding for from a trust is that we are developing a citizen debt audit in Newham in East London. This project builds on previous work we've done with Debt Resistance UK on LOBO loans. I'm not going to explain that much more about LOBOs. There's some cards on the table next to the popcorn with the local authority debt audit details where you can go online and just read a little bit more about it. But they are very long-term and risky bank loans. Hundreds of councils across the UK have been missold. And Debt Resistance UK is still running a national campaign on LOBO loans, including a few things that Vika will explain about later. And Research for Action, like I said, is focusing on Newham in East London, and at the moment we are collecting evidence of the impact of austerity in Newham to initiate a conversation about the illegitimacy and illegality of this LOBO debt. There's a summary report called Cuts and Contempt that is a result of the very first results of some interviews that we did over the winter in Newham. But yeah, my colleague Vika Rogers will be speaking about the work that we have been doing as both organizations tonight. And then we are very grateful to our guests who have joined us tonight to share their experiences. They've got quite a few more years of debt audit work under their belts, really. Emma Aviles is part of the citizen debt audit platform, PACD, in Barcelona, and she's been involved with the group since the start, involved in setting it up, in fact. And PACD is one of the groups that were born from the 15M movement that brought hundreds of thousands of people to the squares across the Spanish state to demand real democracy in 2011. And since October that year, PACD has done really groundbreaking work on citizen debt audits on the municipal level in Spain. And it's also laid a lot of the groundwork that has enabled the network of rebel cities that came into power nearly 3 years ago to adopt the progressive policies that they are now adopting. At least I hope so. And Chiara Giacco is a member of PACD in Madrid and also a member of the municipalist process in the city in there. Madrid is one of the cities that were taken over by a progressive grassroots-born coalition in the 2015 local elections in Spain, and it initiated an official debt audit process that Chiara will tell us more about. Unfortunately, the continuity of that process is now in danger because since December, Madrid's former head of finance, who's really the most important elected person in the council, Carlos Sanchez Mato, was sacked because he refused to back a cuts program in the city hall. And then we've got Christina Laskaridis, who is a PhD researcher at SOAS University of London at the moment. But the reason she's here is that she was part of the official debt audit committee in Greece, the Truth Committee on Public Debt, in 2015. The committee was set up by the Speaker of the Greek Parliament, Zoe Konstantopoulou, and it worked very intensely in the few months that it had to publish a report that detailed why Greece's debt was odious, illegal, and illegitimate before the committee was then dismantled following the capitulation of Syriza to the European Union and the elections that followed. And yeah, Christina will tell us about the work that she was involved there. And then we've got Simon Morrow, who is part of People's Audit Lambeth, which is a group in South London who are doing a true grassroots citizen audit here in London as well. And yeah, they're really just a group of concerned citizens, some with a bit more background in finance, but most, I understand, not really. Okay, well, anyway, but not everybody in the group is a finance professional, is kind of, yeah, their point, definitely. And they have spent the last couple of years doing an extensive investigation into Lambeth's finances via freedom of information requests and other kind of investigative means. Yeah, they've been digging into kind of financial mismanagement and dodgy contracts, including in the new town halls, libraries, some regeneration projects. I'm sure we'll hear more from Simon about that. Via Skype here, we have Chiara Filoni, who is based in Belgium. She's part of an organization called CADTM, which is the Committee for
the abolition of illegitimate debt.
Illegitimate debts, yeah, sorry. I had a blank after the name change, because it used to be, because it used to be more focused on, debts in the global south and illegitimate debts in the global south, but is now also working, on issues in the global north. And did we manage to connect with Gilles?
Not yet.
Okay, but Gilles Gregor. Sorry, I'm really bad with Belgian French-speaking names. Is is part of a debt audit in Belgium. So if connection permits, they will be both saying a few words about their work as well. So we'll hear about 5 to 10 minutes from each of our speakers here, and then we can take a few questions from the audience between the speakers if you want to ask kind of direct questions, clarifications, but let's save the proper discussion.
So yes, as Fanny said, the Citizen Debt Audit platform in Spain was born from the energy, from the momentum that the 15M movement in 2011 launched in our country. It was a movement that was a breakup with the current political, social, economical system, and one of the strongest pillars was that we wanted to take action into our hands. No, it is the citizens that are the only ones that are able to change the situation. So through this idea, also under the logic of we dismantle while we build. We thought, okay, what can we do? No, what can we set up as a process to attack this system and propose something new? And debt audit was one of the various ideas on the table. This is the one we were involved with, and we started looking for people, organizations, and different activist citizens that would be willing to join us. We also contacted with people in other cities, and we set up this platform, and the idea was that it was a distributed network with different nodes around the country, different cities, like quite a few were set up just in the first year. And the idea was to start working together towards this goal, define ourselves as a group, and also exchange knowledge. Like the force was in the fact that we were connected, and it was collective intelligence, not to be shared. So we were a group of people, mostly citizens and activists, non-economists. No, there were like very few auditors in the group. But as I will explain later, there were so many things to do around this initiative that at the end of the day, the combining of all these different skills was very, very interesting and necessary. So I will read out how we defined ourselves at that moment. It was like a few years back in 2012. We were saying that we were a movement to carry out a citizen debt audit to examine and evaluate the process that produced our debt. And the fact that we talk about process for us was very, very important. It's not about achieving the goals or the results of an audit, but what is the social process that we go through while we do this, no? So we didn't only want to examine economic data, but also determine if the indebtedness process had been legal, legitimate, and transparent. And we also wanted to find out what were the damages and the aggressions done to the people based on legal, accounting, financial, environmental, and the social norms established in our country. And we had some general objectives that were like the ones you walk towards that are on the horizon. We wanted to promote change of our economic and political system and transform our culture and society using the denunciation of the debt mechanism. We wanted to recover people's sovereignty through learning spaces and participative methodologies, providing society with an empowering tool which to fight for transparency, democracy, and social justice. Like, we were very, very convinced about the fact that it was vital to keep enhancing citizen participation in the process of change, where you have active people doing things instead of passive people joining campaigns or joining actions, which was more the traditional model of NGOs that launch proposals, that this had to be something done by us, and we had to become citizens that were active in our political life, because this would be an ongoing process. Like, we will always have to face political powers that are not ruling in the favor of the people, of course. And we also, another objective was not to pay their legitimate debt and denounce those responsible for getting us into this mess, and for us this was very important, because it's not like debt fell from the sky and it's like inevitable. No, there are people behind this with names and surnames we needed to point at as responsible for this. And not only responsible, but how can we go after them, And the problem in Spain as well was regarding debt was that a lot of private debt, like especially bank debt, was turned using the crisis into public debt. Like, we had our bank bailouts and we had all austerity measures imposed upon us in exchange. And for us, this was a very, very leveraged and important part, because we were having movements that were trying to stop austerity in healthcare and education, on all the different areas that people were fighting. And in some way, we were trying to help build their narratives and fill their narratives. So how, on these overall big objectives, how do we go down into the detail, and what's the work and the concrete things we can do, So we had like different commissions, different working groups, and we worked at different levels. We had working groups that were auditing different aspects of the state debt. For example, we had a group, Audit Sanidad, which looked into debt in the healthcare system, which looked into PPPs in the healthcare system and denounced them, and demanded information and communicated about all that was happening in this privatization process of our healthcare. And actually, the movement, the wider healthcare movement, managed to stop the privatizations of many hospitals. I think if we hadn't had all this force behind, the situation would now be much worse. We also had groups that looked into the bank bailout to see what happened exactly with what we call the scam. It was not a crisis; it was a scam. The looting of what used to be a public bank, no? And this actually had a spin-off project that launched legal process, which was also a communication guerrilla campaign against our bankers and politicians that we found were, because we found the clues for, to prove this, that they were responsible for the scam, and right now they are facing jail. About to at the end of the legal process to go into jail. So win-win. We also did a photo project, like try to map out what would be the hot spots of our public debt, to know where would it be more interest, because it's so much work, you can't do everything. You just try to map out where were the most interesting points, like to go deeper into, no? We also did a lot of work on communication. Like communication, not only for us, but from all the social movements, is a key issue in the process. Like, you have to communicate with the people, you have to empower them, you have to keep them informed and participate and debate with them about what's going on, and you have to build a new narrative around the issue of debt, no? And I think this is another thing we succeeded in, because, for example, the education movement, they would be going out with banners saying, we won't pay your debt with our education. So they were telling the powers that this is your debt, you created it, it's not our debt, we created it. And that was very important for the narrative. Or we had the mainstream narrative is, you've lived over your possibilities. In English, would it be like that? Your capacities? Your means, you've lived over your means. So the slogan was changed into, you have lived over our means, no? The politicians, the bankers, you have lived over, you've overspent our public money, no? So what we saw then with all the political transformation as well we've gone through is that the claim for a citizen audit, transparency and democracy was very, very high on the list of the new political programs. So I think this was another win, because we managed to put this through to the mainstream, and we put this through as well to political parties. We also did a lot of work, like Twitter, social media, like we were really, and we still are really, really there. We did a lot as well, for example, when Greece was going through their debt audit process and political turmoil, no? We created this video that went super viral that we sent over as a message for the Greek people. It was all like really based on emotions, and it really, for us, this was a very, very special way to connect with them, no? What else? Mobilization, of course, mobilization out on the streets. That also many, many times coincides with the fact if your society is ready for it or not. For example, right now, I think mobilizations is like the sea. You have high waves, you have low tides, and right now we are like, I think, gathering momentum for a new one, but it's a bit more quieter than back in 2012, 13, 14. Promotion of municipal audits, we did a lot of that, even though we didn't start, but Chiara will tell you more about this exciting process. We did a lot of work establishing networks with other movements, with organizations, and also international work. We created the International Citizen Debt Audit Network, and this is how we got to meet people in different countries and exchange knowledge and exchange ideas, help each other out at the international level. And now that we are in this new political cycle, which we call the assault of the institutions, we've had many of us that have gone into city councils through these newly created political platforms, which are not Podemos, which is something different. And actually many of these, but not only people that have gone into governing, but also in opposition, no? There's a lot of work being done now on municipal debt audits. So I think I will stop my introduction to what we do back in Spain here. As Barcelona didn't have debt, we have had to entertain ourselves with other issues. But Madrid is a fantastic example of the work done at this level, so I leave Chiara to tell you.
In 2015, we won the election with the left side of the city, with our Madrid. And Carlos Sanchez Mato, that was is the head of the finance in Madrid. He was part of the movement also. So by the movement, we decided that that was the good time in order to make a proposal to the city of Madrid to have a real citizen audit of the debt. So what did we do? We try to organize a document, a big document, with different parts in order to explain to the people which was our idea about the audit. And we would like to explain to the people that it was so difficult to do this, and it was just to have the envy and the courage to start. Even if you don't have so many people, you can start. So we organized the document with an introduction about the situation of the debt generally in Spain and the world, to explain that what we think about the debt. And then we try to explain then also the goals of the audit. We would like to work with the audit as a process for the people. We think that the audit is just the goal, but it's just the process that you can do, like with a popular education to all the people, in order to explain that if you go to the shop market and you ask the ticket about the things that you bought, of course the government has to give to you the receipt about the money that is spent for you in your place. So this is a little bit the idea that we had, and we try to explain this really, really easy for the people, because we were different people. For example, I'm not an economist, I never studied lawyer, I never think like that. We are different people from different sector. We just believe that the debt is the big cause for many problems, so we decided to start by ourselves. And then with the audit, we really would like to try to do transparency, the gastos, the spend that the city of Madrid had. And so we would like to decide, for example, how many years before the change of the government we could audit in some ways, and which part of the sector of the spend we can't analyze. And we would like also to invent a system to make really easily for the people to understand how the government spends the money. And at the same time, we would like also to give to the government and to the political people some instrument in order to work in a different way, because sometimes the political people, they are just closed, they don't think about that, they have to stay in contact with the people on the street, on the way, or something like that. So that was, that were our goals in some ways. And at the same time, we will try to make, with this document, start a process against the corruption in Madrid, because we had a lot of corruption for 20 years, more or less. They spent a lot of money in different situations. They made a different building, and we don't know why they did this, and still now we really don't use really well this kind of stuff. So that was the most important for us, I mean, to explain to the people that if in your area, after 2 years, you have a new building, you have to ask you why they made this building and why they didn't make, for example, a school that was more important for the people of the area. And the object was also to understand what they can audit, because some people are like afraid, because they said, I can't read all the budget, I can understand the number and everything like that. But at the end, we would like to explain that it's not so difficult if you start just checking with the list the problem that you have in your area. For example, about the new building, or maybe about some contract with the people that clean the street, and you don't understand really well why they clean, which is the process that that organize this kind of stuff. So in this In this way, we try to make like a format. We call this a feature of illegitimidad. It's like illegitimacy. When we speak about the what, we think about legal, illegal, legitimate, illegitimate. Is it in English? Yeah. So we try to make like a big format with different questions, because if the people want to start with the audit, they can try to answer all the questions. So they can, at the end, they can make like a report about the analysis of the situation of their area. And it's really nice, because if you don't have anything about economics and everything, you can use this document in order to understand more, which is the problem, and that's it. And then we also propose to the city of Madrid, like I say, a perspective about the subject that they have to participate in the audit, in the citizen audit. So we propose, for example, that it could be really great if we can have a technical committee, and then the people can participate in the technical committee, but at the same time they have to make some meeting with the movement, because even if they are in the city, they don't know really well what's going on in the city during the time that the audit is going on. So that was really important for us, the participation of the people, and to try to looking for some instrument in order to contact with the people. And then of course, we would like that PACT, my movement, participate at the process, because we were thinking about all the situation, and we would like really to participate to this. And the last part of the project, about the document, was just an analysis about the timing and the steps that you have to do in order to organize the audit. And it was just an open document, it's not a closed one, but we thought that it was really good for the people in order to understand really what we want, and also for the political people to understand what we want. So at the end, what's happened? We propose everything. We started with a big meeting in Madrid. We invite different people for the different parts of the city, and we try to explain the basic stuff of the process and the basic element, in order to make like a sustainability study about the situation. And then we give them the format of the feature about the analysis of the question. So fortunately, 3 groups, they start by themselves in Madrid, in the south area of Madrid, and they still work more or less well. And at the same time, even if the city of Madrid at the end didn't contact us, we have so many meetings with them, and we still are in contact with them, but we would like to work more with them, but it was not so easy at the end. So we started 2 processes. We started the citizen process by the neighbor of the city, and the city of Madrid also started the process. They organize a little bit more the process by committees, like gender committees and an ecology committee, something like that. And they in charge to some, some NGOs or committees or cooperatives in order to make the big analysis of the problem. And we try to maintain the contact between us during this process. And then the big problem is that 3 months ago, Carlos Sanchez Mato was, take off of the exactly, yes, yeah. So even if we still work in this, we would like to continue with the process. And of course, fortunately, I think that they made all the contract, so they have to finish the process about the analysis of the problem and everything. But we don't know really well what's going on. And in 1 year, we will have the next elections. So of course, a big part of the movement, we really would like that something go ahead. We would like to change, but we are not really sure about what's going on. In any case, I think it was really nice for everybody of us, because we have a lot of material right now. Before we were just thinking, and now we have manual, we have best practices, or we think that we have good ideas in order to make to do this kind of stuff. And I think that it's really good for the people, because sometimes when we start speak to the people about the debt, economy and everything, I believe that sometimes the people really don't like so much, and they think that it's really far of them or something like that. And at the end, it's the quotidianity, how you say, the day by day for them. So I think that even if maybe we will not finish all the process and we have to remake the process and to go to do a better process, it was a really good experience for all the city, for all the people that participate and for all of us, because now we have like a treasure in some ways and we can share the material, and we really would like looking for people that help us translate materials, best practices and everything, because it could be for us really helpful to try to cross the experience in different countries or on cities in order to make a best a best manual. And the last stuff, actually, we started like 1 year ago, more or less, with a big net. It's Red de Municipios contra la Deuda, the net, the city against the debts. So each, every time, we are all in contact, all the city that we are working this, we try to sharing experiences. And we also make we try to do every 6 months is a big meeting, so if you want to come, for example, for the next meeting, it would be really nice for us to receive you, because it's really nice in order to understand what are the problems for the people that working always in the institutions, because and then which is the difficult also for the movement, because we have to find a way between the institution and the movement in order to make the best, so it's not so easy. I'm so sorry. Thanks so much.
How difficult do you find it to get the financial information?
So much. It's
Yeah.
really, really difficult. But we found a way that any time that we had some problems, we register all the process. I mean, when the people go to the institution asking for the information and everything, we try to have all the papers in order to show to the people that we made all the process. And then if we don't receive the information, many times we make, like I say, by the newspapers, on the social net, we denounce in the newspaper that the city of Madrid didn't give us the documentation. So cause depression of the people, like la vergüenza. La vergüenza.
Communication strategy.
Shame, exactly. So cause the shame, maybe sometimes it's work. Yeah, it's not, it depends, but
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just laughing because
yeah.
people I deal with have no shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
We go through the process, but in England I spoke to somebody the other day, it took him 4 years of trying to get somebody's diaries.
We have many municipalities in Madrid,
Yeah.
so we start speak with the people that were working directly in the small district.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And sometimes even, maybe it's not so nice, some people, we speak with some people that were working political, and to ask them to help us in order to receive, for example, the information that they analyze in the plane of the council or something like that.
Yeah.
That is another way.
Yeah.
It's better to start with the local area, never with the big city.
Oh, yeah. No.
Because if not, it's like you
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
London consists of 32 different boroughs.
32.
Yeah, which, places like Newham, where we do work, and places like Lambeth, where Simon's group works.
So each one is maybe 200, 300,000.
Yeah.
During the kind of austerity stuff, that local authorities, municipalities, were compelled to some extent by the Spanish government to borrow money. First of all, is that correct? And secondly, where were they borrowing the money from? Because in the UK, the local authorities, councils, would generally, not always, but generally borrow from the national government, which is the Treasury. And it's
Yeah.
called the Public Works Loans Board, which in turn borrows from the markets. I'm not sure if that exists in Spain. Is there a similar body in Spain, or were the councils compelled to borrow from the banks in order to lift the banks in some way?
The European Union can give directly to the municipalities and to the government the money, so the money has to pass for the bank, by the banks. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah.
So by the banks. So, for example, That's the big problem. It's one of the problems that we had. For example, when the European Union give to the banks the money, they give them the money like with an interest like 0.5 interest, no?
Yeah.
And then when the banks, Chiara. No, because I was saying something that maybe Chiara she knows better, so I would like just that's. So when
Yes, I'm here.
yeah, if I say something that is not really true, please correct me. So sorry about that. So when the banks they receive the money with this kind of interest, but when the banks give the money to the municipalities or something like that, they cover then like around 4 or 5 interests more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was the question. I don't know.
Something like it was just the general idea of where Spanish councils, local authorities, ayuntamientos and
Yeah.
municipalities borrow. In the UK, they often borrow from the national government.
Yeah.
And the national government borrows from banks and markets.
Ah.
Yeah. But in Spain, I do think that the councils borrowed
Bothered
from
meaning
borrowed. Prestar.
Prestar.
Yeah. The councils borrowed from banks directly, so private commercial loans.
It's a private, yeah.
Yeah.
And because these, for example, in 2013, it's when they have to change the constitution. They changed the 135, the article of the constitution. So they said that before that you use the money that you have more, you have to pay always the debt.
I was just to make an observation, I guess, that I think the reason the UK government, the councils in this country have more of the flexibility is because they can borrow essentially via the Bank of England. Whereas I guess in the European Union you have the European Central Bank and money is distributed via that, but you don't have the same flexibility in each country, which is obviously part of the issue about how the EU is designed. I think we probably have much more flexibility because of that in this country.
Huge interest.
And they changed the constitution for this.
Change the constitution.
And they did this in August because the people were in holiday. And it's
We're seeing in the UK local authorities becoming more, almost like commercial organisations in a sense. So they're borrowing money from the Public Works Loan Board, for instance, an arm of government, and then they're trying to earn money by commercial ventures, by buying property, by buying businesses, and then trying to earn money back. Is that something you recognise from Spain? Do you see this trend of the local councils perhaps becoming more like commercial businesses in some ways?
in my opinion, in Madrid, it could be, it's not like this, but it could be depends on the area. For example, about buildings and everything like that, I think they starting working this kind of stuff. With homes, we don't have social house or something like that, and they never think about the places or the spaces for the people that they really need. The center of the city became what the London that we had before, so you had before. So it's totally like this. Then it depends on the area, on the person, and everything like that. But of course, la burbuja inmobiliaria, l'edification of the city and the use of the spaces, of course, something like that. Oh, I think so. Mm-hmm. It's like a big business.
I think it's a different style, though.
I think there's still corruption here. I mean, there's still Brentford, Kingston, Chelsea. I mean, they're on council committees. They're getting backhanders from developers. I mean, I don't know what it's like in Spain, but it's not. It certainly isn't all sweets and light over here at all.
Yeah, everyone is corrupt, just different style.
They are more elegant.
Ours are so stupid that we catch them out. I think yours are a bit
are more elegant.
The casta, or the 1%, or whatever you want to call the Spanish state, didn't diversify, haven't got sort of Saatchi and Saatchi telling you to eat your cornflakes in the Scottish referendum, or that sort of level of psychological corruption. It's just as corrupt, like deeply, both really corrupt, but more crude. It's a bit more simple.
My name is Christina. I was part of the citizens' initiative to have a debt audit in Greece, which at some point became an official parliamentary committee. So I'll give a little bit of a phase 1 and a phase 2 experience, but there are a lot of common themes with some of the things that have already been discussed. So yeah, I kind of want to just start by sort of some of the backdrop and the context, which I think helps mobilize an audit for the kind of aims that anybody might be interested in. So the one is basically the common thread, and I think this is similar in Spain, was the sort of total delegitimization of official political structures that you would expect to be able to hold things to account. So there's a complete lack of faith in the official structure that could potentially mobilize that process. So essentially the debt resistance movement, Audit was one kind of part of that, was very much about the hollowed out nature of like official politics. So this thing of bringing things into your own hands, you're going to research, you're going to uncover the truth, or you're going to try and hold people to account, is very much in contrast to the impunity that kind of surrounds just the whole narrative of, you know, scandals being covered up and no one ever held to account about public finances. So, yeah, certainly in Spain you took it to the degree of, you know, we're going to put these bankers in jail, which was very, very inspiring. And I think actually, perhaps in the discussion, you might want to share more about how the XNet and the Rodrigo Rato case made this platform possible for people to deposit documents, because there's a question of how do we sort of enhance the ways that we can access information that's always trying to be concealed. And this kind of WikiLeaks encouraging whistleblowing type in people who work there, but to anonymously, gladly give away, you know, all of the things that they've seen. Finding ways to do that, I think that was amazingly successful in Spain. So that would be maybe something worth just discussing. And again, in terms of the backdrop, trying to reverse the argument of who owes who. So this is a very common argument from the Global South. Trying to reverse the balance of power between the debtors and the creditors. And I mean in Greece, but also in other countries, in Spain, the don't owe, won't pay, I think in the UK as well, was a very strong political slogan that people used in squares and, yeah, kind of occupations. Okay, so and then the kind of second, like, overarching backdrop that I kind of wanted to mention was just, yeah, what's the overarching theme that one of the movements I've been involved in have tried to do? The one is, you know, you have this very obvious curtailment of rights and privatizations and cuts and, you know, the austerity drive, and the debt is kind of standing there in the background as the sort of a reason, you know, we need to do all these cuts because we have to repay. So even though you have all of this social justice, you know, highlighting inequality and social justice, you can basically, rather than kind of saying, you know, there's a human rights issue, you know, we need to plead for forgiveness, debt forgiveness story, the actual process is about delegitimizing the process of accumulation of debt. So you kind of take austerity with it, basically, by trying to uncover how those two things are always intricately connected. So if you try and highlight how the ways in which that the debt accumulation didn't serve the collective benefit, you know, it was done for private profit, it was done against people's interest, then the austerity that's kind of imposed to legitimize it kind of can crumble as a story at the same time. So yeah, some reflections on the Greek audit experience. So the campaign, so the citizens group was formed in 2011, so that's really, I think, when we met. And so I was part of the group that tried to demand an audit, and very much the story then was, it was 1 year after the first bailout had been signed, and there was very much this black box effect of what was really the nature of the problem. So people were very much kept in the dark about, you know, what is this debt that is being talked about? And through a variety of means, you know, the kind of objective from the beginning was to cancel illegitimate, illegal, odious, so unsustainable. So the inspiration was very much movements from the South, movements that had already basically discussed very similar themes to what we were now just arriving at. And I've brought here some audit things. And, you know, for example, this is the Ecuador Official Audit Commission of 2007, which was one of the official inquiries that inspired us. There were citizens' movements in Brazil, in the Philippines, in several countries of the South from the past, which we sort of were drawn to as places that we can learn from what the hell to do in this kind of very rapidly unstable kind of situation. So this was a group that was, loose coalition, grassroots, very much forming and kind of coalescing around the movement of the squares of 2011 in Sidarma. People were very much interlinked with other social movements as well, so labour movements or other social concerns, anti-privatisation issues. So people were very much branching into lots of different but linked kind of situations. So, yeah, that was kind of phase one. We had a series of popular education tools that we used. We tried to do a lot of debunking of myths. We created a lot of resources and try to outline the reasons why we need to open the black box of debt. So writing a lot of stuff. So yeah, I have some broader things which are just about the educational and empowering objectives of the audit process. So this thing that we never had this view of a technocratic process, but a broad social process. Yeah, of education and kind of empowerment, of making people back in control of what was very much a situation of helplessness of the big authorities kind of, sweeping the country downhill, and people not being really able to assess and really being able to, trying to make a stand. So, so we can maybe discuss again towards the end how this, what are the broader objectives of audits, but yeah, we kind of used it as a way to break this story of debts have to be paid, or these have to be repaid. So we used the audit as a way to break that narrative So we'll hear later from Chiara as well, but certainly the work that her organisation's done and other people involved in that kind of global movement, sort of the list of questions that you ask and that you want to uncover are very much driving how you do your audit. So, who took decisions? How did they take those decisions to borrow? What was the guiding principle of the borrowing policy? Who was held accountable when those things were being taken place? So in Greece, for example, the local authorities were borrowing from foreign banks with even the governing council of the governing body of the council not having full oversight over some members or some official who happened to be there, happened to be in the key chair at the key moment, accepting loans, and then, they leave, and the council's, in trouble. And so we kind of try to unpick a series of kind of key questions about the sort of financial details, about the political circumstances in which those loans were made, about the beneficiaries. Okay, this is really important to highlight who benefits from this process, who has profited from this process. Certainly with the Troika and the official, in our story, it was very, very important to highlight how Troika has profited, how the EU, ECB, IMF have profited, how the German financial system, the French major banks that were bailed out, who benefited from this whole story. So, trying to pinpoint these kind of things. So, kind of history had it that a few years later, after our sort of citizens' initiative, the head of the speaker of the first Syriza government appointed and basically created a scientific committee, independent commission within the parliament to conduct an audit. Okay, and this was called the Debt to Truth Committee, and I've got one of our reports here, so we can have a look at it later if you like. And the scientific coordination of the committee was taken over by Eric Toussaint, who's the head of the organisation that Chiara's working for. So there was this kind of this process that began in April, okay, and this was just in the moment where the first Syriza government had come to power, and the clock was ticking, before a new arrangement had to be found at the end of June. So basically we had this moment in time, which was very, very limited, to gather, to organise ourselves and to try and do, well, the best that we could do. So again, the kind of what was the backdrop and the conditions that this parliamentary committee was set up against? It was basically set up against the backdrop of several years of, this is 2015 now, so 5 years after the first bailout, where the only thing that was extremely visible to everybody was what a complete disaster the sort of these 5 years had been. So it was kind of like, again, another attempt to just really open the books and really try and put an honest story on the table as to, you know, why have all of these hospitals and schools and municipalities merged, gone bankrupt? Why have people been fired? Why is there this social catastrophe going on? To try and, yeah, account for the for what's been going on. So we had 3 objectives. So I mean, I can delineate some of the kind of organisational aspects of the audit. So the decision to create the Truth Committee and realise the audit of the public debt was kind of legitimised and justified under 3 main reasons. The one is that the audit process is a democratic right of people to know how state finances have been used, especially when the sacrifices that are being imposed are so great in order to justify that repayment. The second one was justified under legal terms. So we had 2 kind of legal mandates. One was a European one, okay, that under European law there is an obligation for states to audit their debts, especially if they're under a macroeconomic programme. So this obligation had been completely neglected by previous authorities. So there was just like, bailouts being signed, cuts being put through, but the obligation to audit state finances had never been done. And the third one was kind of stemming from international law and from the guiding principles on debt and human rights of the UN. So, so a big overarching framework of transparency, accountability, and basically the sacrifices and curtailments on rights are imposed in the name of debt. So we had a mandate, we had a terms of reference, what we were trying to do. We had a methodology that was developed within the people who were kind of higher up responsible. We obviously had limitations as to what we were going to be able to do in the time that we had. And we had a definition of terms. Okay, what do we mean by legal? What do we mean by legitimate? What do we mean by odious and unsustainable? And how are we going to apply it to our creditors' loans? So we separated out the work into working groups responsible for different things, of different expertise. It wasn't just a technical committee. There were a lot of people from, there were all sorts of people involved. So not just lawyers and auditors, financiers or economists, but also people from social movements and trade unions, academics, all manner of people. So what did the report show? I don't know if this is I guess this is the final thing I want to say, was that the kind of conclusions that the report came to were basically detailed examination of how the loans were used to benefit the creditors, okay, how the money was received. Some of it didn't enter the country, just went to repay private, and then finally the official loans were getting repaid by the new loans. So this kind of total circular problem. There was a lot of novel work done on how these loan agreements, the actual details of the loan agreements worked. That had never been done before, so really looking at all of the legal structures that were set up, the way that the financing was organised, this kind of very nitty-gritty, trace the money, trace the legal structures work that some people really like doing. So that was very, very, very novel contribution. And then the kind of additional work that has been done also by other groups, and official groups, but also citizens groups, was how the conditionality programme sort of involved huge human rights abuses. So the only way that the programme can be repaid, the debts can be repaid, but the debt cannot be repaid without violating a whole host of human rights issues. So we tried to link up the rights in it for education, the rights for hospital, for health, the rights for lawyers, legal things, all of the human rights, and how the conditionality programs have targeted each of those things, basically disabling people to have the right to those things. Okay, and I guess the most important thing, finally, in this was that it provided the first, and I think only, very detailed how to confront the creditors, like a how-to guide, that what are the legal foundations that Greece could have used to confront its creditors. So the lawyers, in particular of the group, detailed several legal tools and strategies that would be available to a government that was committed to confronting the creditors. So there were a host of ways that could have been done, but it was basically trying to support the fact that you need to come into confrontation, okay? You can't just keep paying, you have to stop. So you have to have ways to support, you know, suspension and unilateral actions as a sovereign kind of right. So those were all put down as, in very kind of clear terms. And I mean, I think everybody knows what happened next. So this was all, and just to add to the kind of surrealness of the whole story, this was very much at the end of June. The referendum was on 7th of July, where the government tried to seek a mandate as to what to do in terms of signing or not signing. And while the preliminary report was being discussed, and I think there was a press conference, and it was people in the parliament who were being presented the preliminary findings on strategies to not pay, outside the parliament was a demonstration of conservative, well-to-do, well-dressed people pushing Syriza to sign. So the demonstrations outside, which were not very big or rowdy, but nonetheless they were happening, were for people putting pressure on the government that they need to sign. This was the pro-EU conservative kind of well-to-do gatherings. Meanwhile, in the government, in the parliament, there was a lot of people trying to find out, you know, what had this committee been doing, how could we use our findings to help support confrontation, what could be the next moves. But anyway, the story is very sad how it ends, so we don't have to go into it. But basically, the committee was stripped of its capacities, and in time, all of its activities have been taken off the web. I think there's only very little log of what we did there. So I'm very glad that other organizations have taken on the task of keeping it alive. And the other thing, which I think you already know, but we, in the parliamentary meetings that we had meetings in different parts of the parliament, we showed the video that the Spanish friends had created in support, and we aired it to a lot of people who were there. Some of them, we were having public meetings in the parliament, but also some closed sessions. And in some of the public hearings and public meetings, we showed this video because the international kind of solidarity aspect was extremely important on highlighting, you know, that this isn't, you know, an internal little affair that can be swallowed up for domestic consumption. You know, this has got an international importance, and it puts down precedents, international precedents, on being able, you know, I think this is the most important thing, really, that it has a parliamentary stamp on it, and it creates a precedent for parliaments to be able to write these kinds of things, which are usually the work that we do in our NGO work or in our campaigning work, and we were able to really do that in the context of a parliament. So that was quite something. Yeah.
I was wondering, what do you think about, like, this work remained a little bit too much into the parliamentarian stuff, you know, so it wasn't that spread all over the country. How do you think the social movement take this message, if they take it? This message was spread by the social movement or not? Because I have the impression that it was something that involved like professionals, and it wasn't that spread to movements, to citizens, even if all the audience were indirect on the Greek TV, etc. But I have the impression that the population did not really receive the message and knew that something was going on these days inside the parliament. And just to finish, we realized like an educational video on this process. Gillo, my colleague, the one who left, did it. I mean, it was a collective work, but it's very easy to understand. It's very educational, and it's made by cartoons so it's a useful tool to make people understand this audit process and what was behind the Greek debt and all the problem related to Greek debt.
Thanks, Chiara. So actually, this video, I was thinking if you wanted maybe to even show it today, because it's, I mean, and your video, there's been a lot of really nice summary things that have been created, which kind of highlight the spirit of the times. Okay, I agree very much with Chiara's concerns about how well or not well the audit process was able to sort of trickle into society. And I think in this stark contrast to the Spanish experience and kind of the Spanish capacity, amazing capacity to place a huge emphasis on grassroots communication tools, the Greek experience was not able to do that with any equivalent success. And I think there's a few reasons for that. I think the one is that in the eyes of a lot of social movements, people didn't need an audit to delegitimize the debt process. You know, it was already a scandalous thing. And actually, from the beginning, the audit notion had a kind of an appeal to some people. The other thing that when the parliamentary process started, setting up a good communication team wasn't part of the things that were actually looked after properly. So that was one really big error. I mean, we can talk about the errors, but that's a bit more disheartening. But similarly to that, what you're saying about the TV thing was that it was very, there was a lot of personification of the individuals involved and less of the content sort of distribution in the society. So, you know, the Speaker of the Parliament and the head of the Scientific Committee did take a lot of the traction of the moment and were key to the communication, but that was the sort of very top-down level of communication, as opposed to maybe what you're saying about how do we work to promote this in society as a whole. So, there are lots of lessons to be learned. I think, to a large degree, the constraints, I think, that everyone found themselves under allows for some of that, but I totally agree that there should have been a much more sophisticated approach to communicating the results domestically to interested people. I'm not even necessarily talking about social movements, I just mean just in general. There is a legacy there, I think, for those who want to look. I think some of the this is, I guess, a reflection maybe on a lot of movements which are personified in some way, that their fame and fortune hinges on how that reputation of those people evolve. And certainly in the Greek political scene, the Speaker of the Parliament was subsequently delegitimized in the eyes of the people. So the things that she pioneered, which was this committee and other things, got delegitimized in that wake. You know, and that's not her fate only, that's the fate of anyone of that previous Syriza era who were trying to do things. They were very much, and that's how politics works, basically. You throw mud at everybody. Again, I think the people who are genuinely interested in the debt issue and the human rights issue are aware that it's there.
But then I guess there was also a problem of time. I mean, everything has been done very, very quickly in a very short time, and also a problem of financial means. I mean, this audit has been done like almost without any financial means, because people were paid but very little, and I mean, they did all this big, you did all this big work without any financial means. So I guess it's two of the reasons that can explain why this communication has not been done, and why the message has not been spread through the population.
Can I follow on from that?
Yeah, of course.
What I was wondering was, how did you arrive at those definitions? I know odious, for instance, has a definition in international law, but how did you decide on what illegitimate means? Because that's one of the big conversations in a lot of the movements.
So I'd just like to start off, really good questions. The terms used and the definitions used were largely a product of sort of a long body of work that the scientific coordinator has done on the topic, in collaboration with a few people from the UN who were there, who've been working on the impact of human rights and debt on human rights, and just tried to kind of, I mean, I can read, I've got them here, okay? Yeah, so, but, yeah, just to highlight, okay, so illegitimate. Debt that the borrower cannot be required to repay because the loan security or guarantee, the terms and conditions attached to the loan security or guarantee, infringed the law or public policy, or because the terms or conditions were grossly unfair, unreasonable, unconscionable, or otherwise objectionable, or because the conditions attached violate various standards of human right. Or, and there's another or. So there's various ways in which a loan can be understood as being illegitimate. Illegal, okay, doesn't follow proper legal procedure, or where there's clear misconduct by the lender, including bribery, coercion, undue influence. Okay, whether there's contraction of the debts in violation to international domestic law. Odious, in violation of democratic principles, or used against the best interests of the borrower. And unsustainable is largely to do with the capacity of a state to repay without infringement of human rights.
For us, like, one of the most important things is that it is us, the citizens, that define what illegitimate debt is through our sovereignty, you know? So for us it was more important to work it top down, from down up, than to have experts or the UN say what was illegitimacy, and because this is the way you appropriate the concept as well.
All of this stuff got swept away because you wanted to stay in the euro.
I mean, there are lots of explanations for what and why happened. Yeah, I don't necessarily want to go into the full thing. The government capitulated and signed a third programme, even though it had a clear mandate to reject austerity, and even though it had a tool in its hand that it could use to confront the creditors. So, and it did that immediately within the days that we were very much active. So the actual cohesion between government and parliament, and even the broad party actually, was loose and not good at all.
And the aim with the definitions, was it to enshrine them in national law or constitutional law, or what was the kind of, because how do you, because presumably these are not one-time definitions, right? It's like you want that process to be, when the state borrows again, you want it to be governed by those definitions in some sense.
I mean, what we were trying to do in this context was basically define the terms that we would work under and try and limit our project, which was going to last, we knew, a few months. And we had basically to define what we were going to do in these, what was the mandate that we were given to do. So we had, in terms of like, what are the questions to ask, how were the loans taken, who did they benefit, what interest, what principle, blah, 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 blah. And then apply these concepts onto the loans.
When you were trying to get access to, let's say, for instance, like loan contracts or particular financial information, did you find that being, I guess, within the parliament, or having lawmakers in the kind of parliamentary bureaucracy was able to really kind of assist in that process, or was there a tension between people in power that may have been responsible for information not wanting to give it up? So was it an advantage being within the parliament, or was it always the case it was an advantage, or was it quite a complicated?
There are people who are sympathetic to what you're trying to do, and people who aren't. And you have to utilise all the means that you have to get the information that you want from where you might be able to find it. So we had some people who were working in the parliament who were very sympathetic. We had the Speaker of the Parliament, so the boss of the parliament, who was the owner of this project, let's say. So very much held a lot of sway over things. and access that we were given. There were a lot of very sympathetic ministers who were able to give us information about, pensions or education or health. But of course, we also faced a lot of closed doors. So the central bank in particular, the Bank of Greece, was extremely hostile. Yeah, so we got mixed messages from different places. And I think one of the biggest onuses was that the Parliament itself had a repository of things that had been deposited to be investigated. And that was a very key source of information. So sort of in the period of 5 years of all of this happening, things had already, so there were pockets of information already building up in the Parliament that we could get access to, as opposed to, as opposed to also having to try and find things from scratch.
You used the term conditionality programme. I'm interested in what that was all about, and if I explain the kind of reasoning behind that, because in the UK we've had conditionality as a term within the UK benefits system, that if you're signing on to have benefits, there is conditionality, and it's the job centre who runs conditionality, and that's what's putting people into food banks these days. So I'm interested in the term and where the term actually comes from.
Like with the structural adjustment programs from the 70s and 80s, that you sign a loan, let's say from the World Bank or the IMF, and that loan comes with conditions, a conditionality program. So for example, specific fiscal targets that have to be met, a lot of performance criteria that have to be met, structural benchmarks that have to be met, before you can get the access to the next portion of the loan. So that's called the conditionality program. In these, European Troika loans, they're memoranda of understanding. Legislative process around everything is determined in these conditionality programs. So it's a similar thing. It's the gatekeeper. Oh yeah, can I just add that I don't know if you have contact with the Irish groups, but there was an Irish audit as well, which was a citizens' initiative. And they published this audit report, for example. So I've just brought 3 audit reports as examples, okay? This was ours, the parliamentary one. This was another official one, which was from Ecuador, so the Ecuadorian official audit that had very profound consequences for the debt. And then the Irish one, which was an initiative by a trade unionist and some academics and an auditor, who had a very specific mandate, but were very linked to the campaigns against the Irish debt as well. So that's worth maybe bridging with.
Debt Resistance UK has been around for quite a while. It's a campaigning, activist, grassroots, open organisation that has been working on various types of debt, and our main project has been around local government debt. So most of the work that I'll be talking about was done by Debt Resistance UK. Research for Action was set up, so you can see like the more activity us and the more professional us. So the cooperative, this is a cooperative that was set up by 3 members of Debt Resistance UK, which is myself, Fanny and Joel. Oh, thank you, sorry. And this was sort of a moment in which we realized that there was so much research behind this and that we wanted to be able to develop it in a sustainable way. So the cooperative was set up last year, and we have managed to obtain a grant to develop a citizen debt audit in Newham. So that's part of the project is run by Research for Action. And I'll be talking a bit about that as well. I'm going to give a really, really short overview of local government finance in the UK. So local government spending amounts to approximately 1/4 of UK public spending, and here you have a sort of a list of like what local government spends its money on. Again, happy to share this presentation if everyone wants to read. They're like all really text heavy, so I'm not going to go through all the details, but it's all there if you want it. This is how local government receives money, so 75% through central government, 10 to 25% through council tax, and then the rest from fees and charges on services that have been used. This is changing very, very rapidly. It's in the last 5 years, so this is fluctuating a lot. And when it borrows, as we started talking about it before, it borrows mainly from central government, from what is called the Public Works Loan Board. It then, there's a very small part but that's also growing. That's municipal bonds, so that is increasing at the moment. There's a new sort of municipal bond agency that's been created very recently. Very little also from councils, or I won't go into detail from that. But what we focused on was the private banks. There's a lot that can be spoken about like Public Works Loan Board might be closed down, like there are a lot of issues around this, but I'm going to just focus on the work that we've done, which is around private banks.
Can you just go back 2 slides just to get the balance of where the money's coming from for 1 second? So council taxes are coming from there.
I'm happy to share this presentation with you later.
So, okay, 'cause I'm just trying to work out what the gap is and whether.
Also because this is changing so much now because of the cuts in central government funding, basically. I'll just go, if you don't mind, I'll go, and I'm very happy to email you this presentation. So this is showing, sorry, I lost. Yeah, so we focused on the borrowing from the banks. So, and this just like, okay, yeah, no, I lost track slightly. No problem. Yeah, so these are more than half of the local authorities across the UK are borrowing from banks, and this is more or less the amount. Now, I showed you the figures before of like, okay, 75% of the borrowing comes from the Public Works Loan Board, but there's a great number of local authorities that are actually borrowing much more from banks than from central government. Now, there are various reasons why it's problematic that they're borrowing more from banks. First of all, if they're borrowing from central government, at least any profit from interest is recirculating in the economy. We know that there are also some problems related to that you can also like talk more about. But specifically with what we've found is that they've been using some loans called Lobo loans that are very costly and risky. And they also contain derivatives. And we'll go a bit more into detail on what they are and how they work. But also here, I won't dig too deep because I want to talk more about like what we're doing about it. But this type of loan, it's called a Lobo loan, which stands for Lender Option Borrower Option. And it has like these peculiarities. First of all, it's very, very long term, so from 40 to 70 years. It starts off usually with a fixed teaser rate, a low rate, that sort of tries to compete with what the councils could borrow from central government. And then at predetermined dates, the bank could decide to change the interest rate, and the council can decide to get out of the loan. But if the bank doesn't decide to do anything on that date, the council basically cannot do anything. And so one of the main problems about this loan is that the council can't get out of it, can't restructure it without paying extremely exorbitant fees that could go up to 90% of the value of the loan. And through this mechanism, councils are now stuck into loans with very high interest rates because they were taken out like from the 80s onwards. So now I'll talk a bit more about like what we're doing about it. So we started after the PADCD. I think we had already started a bit before the Truth Committee happened, but they are like really have been the inspiration for us. So like a lot of the work that we're doing is simply, learning from them and saying like, okay, how can we adapt this? How can we learn from them and adapt it in the UK? And that's just to highlight how important it has been, that all this material has been shared and made public, and how important it is also that we do the same in our own work. So starting point, all this is happening, but who is responsible for looking at auditing the councils in the UK? And in 2015, the body that was meant to be auditing the council was shut down because of the cuts. So at the moment, this has been outsourced to private companies, to the big four accountancy firms. And at the same time, these firms are providing other services to councils. And so that you can see how there's quite a conflict of interest. We're also, like, through the work we're doing, we're also noticing how they have, like, no idea how councils work, and also how they're, like, basically covering up everything. But anyway, we can go more into detail about that, and I'm sure Joel has a lot to say about that. And also the FCA that we expected would be regulating the lending from banks came back to us saying we have no responsibility in looking at this. This is like an agreement between the council and the bank, and we've got nothing to do with it. because councils are sophisticated lenders. This is like one of our most viral meme. This is the logo of the FCA of just like, yeah, we don't care basically. And just so you know, the FCA is actually funded by the banks, so you can sort of. So where did our work start from? Basically digging for information at the start. So this is like the work that we did through a platform called is what do they know? We've sent hundreds and hundreds of freedom of information requests to like all the councils that we knew were borrowing from banks. We've used what do they know because it means that it's a platform that means that all the process is open to the public. Anyone can see what's going on, if the council's responding or not. This is also really useful if you're trying to work with journalists because they don't have to quote Debt Resistance UK, they can just quote the FOI directly. It's useful for other citizens. You know, we've got citizens writing to us saying, oh, I've been interested in this council and I've seen you sent this FOI and like how can we collaborate and so on. And it's also been very useful to fight back because some councils are like, oh, we don't want to give you this information, and you can just link to the other FOIs and be like, well, actually, that council there actually gave us this part of the information, so you have no right to withhold it, and so on. The next thing was like to make sure that all this information was available to the public. So we're still constantly updating our website, very slowly because it takes a lot of time. But like on our website, first of all the issue of LOBO loans is explained in a very accessible language. There's a glossary and so on. And you can go and search your own council and see how much debt it has. We've also managed to publish the actual contracts of the loans. So it's basically a tool there for any local citizen, journalist, or whatever to go and dig deeper and use that material. So yeah, this is some of the images of like how we presented the work. Now, interestingly, thanks also to the hard work of Joel with the media, Channel 4 picked up our work, and this was really early on. We had been working for probably like 6 months, a year on the project, and decided to do a documentary. And it was, I think, like for a campaigning organization, it was a bit too soon. Like suddenly we had all this attention, and we were still sort of uncovering stuff. This was, a very powerful documentary. It interviewed experts who said how terrible these loans were, but also a whistleblower who had been involved in sending these loans. So it provided us with a lot of material to fight back as well. But the most powerful thing that it generated was a parliamentary inquiry. So like a week after, I think, or 2 weeks after, a parliamentary inquiry was called. And all the people on the program were invited to testify. And anyone could submit evidence as well online, so we've also submitted evidence. We were really excited, something was happening. It all stopped there. So let's say we obtained two things. One thing is in the public domain. It's out there. We've got like a journalist from Japan contacting us like a week ago saying, oh, this is interesting, can we meet? But yeah, change hasn't happened, but the other thing that's very powerful is that there's like documents online on the Parliament's website, so that it's like official documents there denouncing what the problem is. But again, a bit like you were talking about Greece, the sudden realization that the actual bodies that are meant to be doing something about this aren't doing anything. So it's really up to us and what should we do. I'm going to briefly go through some of the aspects of this debt that we consider illegal, and then I'll go more into the sort of the conversation about legitimate debt. So a lot of councils across Europe have been sold loans with derivatives. And they've actually, there have been quite a few legal cases against the banks, and that they were like sold loans without the details being explained and so on. There's a big difference between the rest of Europe and the UK, which is that in Europe, the expectation is put on the seller. So the seller has to, be providing the right information and so on. In the UK, the responsibility is on the buyer. So it's, if you didn't read the details, it's your problem. Is that sort of explained rightly, Joel? Or?
Yeah. So in Europe, as a duty of good faith, you actually have a responsibility to give a product appropriate for the person buying. Whereas, in the UK, the seller has absolutely no responsibility, and the buyer has to understand exactly what they're buying, even if they're not an expert. So it's a system made to abuse people who have no power, essentially.
Yeah. So already we're in a position of like harder to fight back.
Why
These
do
things.
EU law, given that we're still in the EU currently?
I don't think yeah, that's a good way. I
So-
guess it's probably one of the exemptions that the UK is like.
When the EU was formed, Ireland and the UK negotiated a exception so that the rest of Europe operates on duty good faith, and Ireland and the UK still operate as a legal principle of caveat emptor.
Does that regulate all, determine all lending transactions, not just?
It does, but there's some overrides. So if you're like an individual, you have some protections from it. But if the bigger you get, the less protection you get, and caveat emptor always applies.
Does it mean that if you're a official person, like a council person, rather than, have you got more onus to buy legally, justly? Is there like more pressure on? Should there be more pressure?
How would I explain it is in the UK there's no such thing as fraud, right? So everyone talks about this thing called mis-selling. Mis-selling is basically fraud, but because there's this thing of caveat emptor, basically there is no fraud because there's no responsibility on the person selling. So I'm selling you something which is completely opposed to your interests, but because the law allows that, then that's not actually a crime, so we create this new word called mis-selling, and we kind of shovel it all into that category.
And I haven't got the loans here, but there's some loans that really even say it. This is like completely against your interest. We'll be raising interests, and it will be it's ridiculous.
It's incredible because one of the two things we caught our bankers on was selling a product to people that wasn't well explained, and they didn't have the knowledge to contract these shares.
Yeah.
If it had been the other way around, we wouldn't have been able to catch them out.
And most of the legal cases in Europe from municipalities have been on that basis, basically, Okay, nevertheless, we do have a precedence in the UK, which was in 1989, which was the Hammersmith and Fulham versus Goldman Sachs case, which was when a lot of swap contracts, like derivatives, had been sold to local governments, and it had reached a level that was completely unsustainable, and so the High Courts ruled that it was not the council's role to be speculating upon interest rates, to be using swaps. I don't know how many people know what swaps are, but it's, let's say, betting on interest rates. So this is, on one side, it's an interesting precedent, because if LOBO loans contain derivatives, we can say, like, okay, councils are actually gambling. On the other hand, LOBOs were actually created to get around this ruling because they embed the derivative rather than having a swap on its own. So that's another, we might be able to use it, we might not. The other level of illegality is that there are other actors involved in the whole process of selling the loans. So first of all, you have the brokers, who are negotiating with the bank and presenting the loans to the council, and they're getting they're getting fees from the banks and they're getting fees from the council, and we'll go a bit more into detail with that. But they're not many companies. So the main companies are ICAP, Probon. I've tried to do sort of a genealogy of like these companies, and they just keep on merging, and they're just, now I think they've just become one, haven't they? Yeah, so it's very hard to sort of map, but in the end they're like the same people. And then there's a very interesting figure, which is called the Treasury Management Advisor. So these are people that are hired by the council to give independent advice to the council on financial decisions. Now, there are a few companies, but the main companies that appear are Butlers, Sector, and Capita. Now, you can read the bottom line. Basically, Butlers was a trading division of ICAP until then in 2011, Capita merged with Capita. So you basically had a broker, a treasury management advisor that was part of a company that was the broker. So you can imagine how independent that was. At the same, and in other cases, when they weren't part of the same company, there were actually flows of money going between them. So just to sort of summarize, you've got the Lobo loan going between, these are the banks that were selling them, between the local authority. You've got the broker that's providing the loan. You've got a fee coming to the broker for the loan. They're getting fees from the banks as well. You've got the Treasury Management Advisor, who's meant to be independent, and they're getting either kickbacks or they're getting money flowing within the company to them. So there's a big question about like how independent the Treasury Management Advisors are and how actually due process was followed in the whole selling of the loans. And so that's another sort of level of illegality that we're trying to fight. Sorry, this I just dropped in at the last moment. The other element that we can fight these loans on is that they're all pegged to LIBOR. There's some that especially were sold after the financial crisis by RBS that are particularly problematic. And there are more and more cases mounting up about the fact that the banks and the brokers were involved in rigging LIBOR, and exactly the same companies, you know, we have RBS here, we have ICAP, we have all these companies that were involved in rigging the loans, were rigging LIBOR, were selling the loans. So there's a complete asymmetry of information, and so that's another level we can be working on. Now I'm going to step into the sort of more citizen part. So those were sort of the legal aspects. And it's very hard, like the hardest part in working on this is like working out who's going to take on the legal challenge. And it's very hard to think that one council alone has the capacity to do it. So one of the things that we're pushing for is that the LGA, Local Government Association, takes action for councils collectively. But what we're also working on is how can citizens sort of trigger this the action. And we'll hear more about also how Lambeth is using this process. And there's something called the Audit Commission Act that allows citizens to challenge the financial decisions of the council. And we've actually got a guide at the entrance that you're welcome to take with you that sort of explains how to do it. We've managed to, and basically what they do is that they make an objection. They say, like, there's this element in the financial accounts that we think is illegal, Lobo loans. And this is why we think it's illegal. And what we've been able to do is like support, you can only do this if you're a resident in that council. So we've managed to support around 40 to 50 people across the country to challenge their council on these loans, providing them the loans, providing them some of the expert knowledge that we have gathered, providing them the parliamentary documents as well that they can use, and so on. Now, the main problem is, again, these documents and this work is then taken on by the external auditors. So we're in the hands of KPMG, PwC, to see, you know, if they're really going to take seriously this work. So we're hopeful, but we're like quite skeptical. But we're trying to gather, like the fact that there are 50 people doing this at the same time, we're going to collect we're documenting the whole process, and we want that to be open to the public and use that also as a way of pressuring central government. Now moving more to the conversation about illegitimate debt, we realized that doing this work at a national level was like impossible. Already just doing the objection at a national level is pretty hard. So we live in a council that doesn't have Lobo loans, otherwise we would have probably done it in our own council. So we've decided to work in Newham, which is is the worst case. It's basically got the highest loans. This is like the amount of that they have in Lobo loans. The fair value on the right is like how much, if they wanted to get out of these loans, the minimum amount they would have to spend.
Just to add one point as well, so Newham was the host borough of the London Olympics, so kind of like Greece has acquired a lot of debt through the Olympics. It's quite interesting. And when we went to the mine in Greece, we were told that they actually brought some of the barriers from the London Olympics to protect this new gold mining site in Greece we visited. So yeah, interesting link.
I'll just read you very quickly. This comes from Fanny's work. So it's also one of the poorest boroughs in the country, a poverty rate of 37%, second highest in London. Average household income before housing costs is 71% of the national average. This one is really shocking. Over 43% of children grow up in poverty. The highest number of people housed outside the borough and in temporary accommodation, and 1 in 25 residents is homeless. So pretty shocking sort of data related to the poverty in this council. This, to bring it back to the context of the UK, so we saw that money was coming in from the grants from central government. Since 2013, there's been massive cuts. About 40% of funding is being cut for local government. So this is what's called the jaws of doom. So what's the expected expenditure of local government and how much funding they're actually going to get. And this, the question is like, okay, where do you cut? And obviously all this is like based on the discourse of austerity. So again, it goes back to the debt of the state and bailing out the banks and so on. You know, there's so much you could talk about. But you can't cut everywhere. You can't cut anywhere. And a lot of the grants are sort of like related to specific things that you can't spend on anything else. And borrowing and interest is ring-fenced. So one of the discourses that we're building is like, well, you know, is it fair that you're counting social services that, like, going back to, you know, conversation of human rights, it's like the amount of poverty and the type of services that you need to, like, look after people, but no, you prefer to spend the money on interest. And this is the case of Newham. This is the amount this is only interest to the banks. And the others are like adult social care, children's social care. So, you know, it's a big proportion of what the council is spending. This was like they were consulting the population on where they should save 50 million. 50 million was more or less the amount they're spending in interest. So this was quite a successful way of sort of communicating this information to the population. They're spending 125% of council tax on interest. This is also another way that people are like getting really angry about. It's like more, all the council tax is just going there. Fanny has done, and also with the support of Joel and Steve, has been working on a report in which basically they interviewed 51 people randomly in Newham on questions about how they're perceiving, how they're living austerity, the cuts, how they're interacting with the council, how they feel democracy is working in the council. There's a summary of that over there that you're welcome to take with you. This will be sort of published in April.
The full report?
The full report.
At some point in April.
But this is the start of the, you know, the process of sort of gathering information from people of how they're actually living the experience. We've got other things planned. So we just found out yesterday that there's, I don't know if you heard this, but there's a courthouse in Newham, and so we would like to stage a sort of public open trial of the debt, inviting all the experts that we've come across, inviting the population to talk. So like this would be like something we would really like to do towards the end of the year. And so all the work that we're doing now is sort of gathering information and working out who could then come and give, sort of testify in this space. We also would like to sort of combine this with something online so that citizens can express their opinion on the legitimacy of this, the payment of interest and so on. This was already a petition that was started 2 years ago, I think, by the Green Party, I think. So, yeah, we would like to combine it with sort of some online activity. There's been some very interesting, this was tweeted today, by the way, Joel. Newham is quite interesting because it's had the same mayor for 23 years.
Oh, yeah. No, he was leader of the council from mid-90s, and he became mayor in 2002 when the mayoral system was introduced. So,
and it's a full Labour council. Like there's no opposition, so they had I won't go into all the details, but basically the primary elections of like who will run for the mayor, and a woman who knows a lot about Lobo loans, and she's been sort of like, we've been in touch with her, ran against the previous mayor, and she won. So there's going to be, it's still the same party, but there's a very radical shift. And so it's a great opportunity to sort of look back and be like, okay, well, let's criticize and analyze what this old sort of party did. So it's a breaking point, and we're really interested to see if we can, collaborate with the new, the actual elections will happen in May, so the councillors that will enter now. And this is just like, I like to finish on this image because these are like, these are like a group of, they're called Focus E15, and they're a group of young mothers protesting in Newham. They were like evicted from their housing and so on. And this has been like a really strong collaboration with them. And it's really like, going back to the sort of like, a lot of people when we try to raise funds for this are like, yeah, but what's the point? No one understands these stuff and so on. And they've really embraced it. They're really like, look, all this money is being wasted on interest rates. Why are you evicting us? So we're working closely with them, and we really hope to be able to work closely with other grassroots organisations.
I live next to a council estate, and the council are saying, we have to demolish it. It's too expensive to repair. We've had 2 independent estimates, 14.5 million, 15.5 million. We don't have the money. And I went round and did my own survey and costed it and came to 6.95, which is half of what they were saying. And before we'd even met, they sort of said, oh, maybe it's not 15. We've had another look, it's 9.3. So they knocked £6 million off straight away. And this process went on and on and on. And every time you queried them, their whole case for demolishing it just fell apart. And it became very clear that they were making decisions that were going to have massive effects on generations to come. They had absolutely nothing to do with the money. And it was all about somebody's political ambitions. And at the same time, they were closing libraries and doing all these weird sort of deals with, they'd have a consultation about what to do with the libraries. And then all of a sudden, like a private gym company would be opening a gym in the library, which just came left field out of nowhere. And, there was a lot of concern around the borough about what was going on, various sort of things. So just sort of gathered together people who are kind of concerned. And also, I heard about this piece of legislation via a book. It's really good, called The Silent State by Heather Brooke, she broke the MP's expenses scandal. And it's all about what the state gets up to that we don't know about, and she mentioned this piece of legislation that allows you to go in and audit your council's accounts, and so we kind of quickly gathered together, and it was a mixture of kind of finance professionals and also people who didn't have a background in finance but just had very legitimate questions. For example, a leaseholder had got a £15,000 bill for repairs to their property, and so I had a mixture of myself, there's a Harvard graduate, accountants, statisticians. So we kind of went in there and sort of asked the questions, and we had sort of, I remember kind of getting a phone call at 7:30 at night from the kind of finance boss, sort of saying, well, we know it's all in a mess, what's you asking all these questions going to help? And so I kind of, when I do auditing, I don't see the point in going in there and telling people they've got everything wrong. So I kind of sort of said, look, why don't I go in there? Because I can see, even looking at the high level figures, I can see this is chaos. And why don't we go in? We can save you some money. Everyone wins. And he kind of got into the spirit of it, and of course he sent my email off offering to help to bosses, and no, it's just they don't want to be seen to kind of. I think for a long time now, because of the kind of resistance about what's been going on, they're just in a kind of siege mentality, and so that kind of fell through, and we didn't get all the sort of the information we kind of wanted, and it seemed so patchy as well, because I did an audit on behalf of a friend in Southwark. His 96-year-old father had got a £21,000 bill for repairs to his council house, and they kind of loved it, because normally, like all the finance department, they never see members of the general public. They're so happy that somebody was interested in their, in the accounts, and they gave me everything, all the contracts, and it was really helpful. And I could go back and challenge. And then, interestingly, I'm currently taking part in a public inquiry. I've asked for the same information. No, you can't have it. It's commercially sensitive. But you've already given it to me. So there is this whole sort of inconsistency that you have to deal with, and you have this constant battle. So we went in, we got some information, and kind of realised we had to sort of follow up with FOIs and so forth. And we you're welcome to a copy. We produced this report last year, and I'd found with dealing with the council, with this whole sort of regeneration process on this estate that I'd been looking at, but whoever I emailed, whether it was the cabinet member, all of the cabinet members, chief executive, nothing in return. Not interested in talking to me, or well, they are now. So it's taken some time, but it's only when the BBC get involved and it all becomes more public that they start to take an interest. And we found it was easier to get a meeting with. We met both Meg Hillier from the Public Accounts Committee and the Minister from DCLG, which is the department responsible for local government. We met them last year. We've only just got a first meeting with Lambeth last week. So what did we find? Well, the council constantly, I think people feel they would have some sympathy about the whole sort of, the council constantly talks about, we've got austerity cuts, that's why we've got to close a library, and there's thousands and thousands of people on the housing waiting list. And so in response to austerity, the council decided to build themselves a new town hall, and after 18 months of trying, I still can't exactly find out what the original budget was. They sold it to the public as 50 million. It's now 104 million. And apparently it's going to save us money. And I'm actually hearing rumours, it's very interesting, because they ended up having to buy buildings that they'd occupied for 30, 40 years and be leasing. They had to buy them so they can knock them down and build this new town hall that's going to save us money. And so that was one thing we found. We found evidence of price fixing with contractors, and one of the things we found with Lambeth is, like, when we released this report, because they can't, you'll find it's all sort of well researched and references, they can't really dispute most of it. So what they do is, well, on the Thursday after we released it, they decided we were a front group for the Liberal Democrats and issued this press statement kind of slagging off the Liberal Democrats for all the cuts they produced in the coalition. But then by the Friday, they'd found a tweet from a Green councillor, so, oh no, they're a front group for the Green Party. So they just sort of throw mud, and they've never kind of wanted to actually deal with the issues or accept there's any problem, and that goes all the way. I had another response from the chief executive last week, just complete denial. we found evidence of, say, price fixing. They'd kind of they'd sold some land, and again, it's sort of to promote. I had an email from a guy in Tower Hamlets, and he sort of said, you have a kind of a different corruption to us, and in the sense that all the decisions are being made on the basis of politics. So, you know, they sold some land to a property developer without any other tenders, and several £1 million less than what it was worth. So they can say, look, we're building affordable housing. We found there'd been sort of a side deal with this gym company to sell off bits of the library. And since then we've done other reports about staff costs, escalating staff costs. Though Lambeth has the highest paid school teacher in the UK. He's on 360 grand a year, and he's been suspended for the last year on fraud charges. But they say, oh, that's nothing to do with us. You know, we can't set the pay of teachers, which is not actually true, because there are limits that governing bodies have to work within, and they've just kind of ignored those, and Lambeth just pay it, don't check anything. And we've just released one as well, which I get kind of a bit despondent sometimes with. I was asking a question. They put out to tender a contract for consultancy for one of these regeneration schemes, and it got aborted. So I thought that's a bit strange. So I did some digging, did some FOIs, and they sent me a response. And then 4 days later said, "Can you delete this, please? Because we shouldn't have sent it to you." And they basically awarded the contract to a consultancy who were 6 million more expensive than the lowest. And there are apparently links between the company marking the tenders and the winning contract. And it's so you kind of think, what does it take to make them ashamed? And they absolutely, when I met them, they were just like, well, this architect, he should have been ashamed for taking us to court. He's wasted all this public money and delayed the project. And and I think one thing that, just echoing what Vika said, is the whole kind of what, I feel like I'm living in this rogue state where they can just kind of behave like a medieval fiefdom, and all the systems that should be in place to stop this sort of stuff happening just don't work. I asked this, we're still finding out about the workings of local government, and they have a corporate committee who are responsible for signing off the accounts and finance, and so I submitted a question because public are allowed to ask questions, and the response I got back was, no, you can't ask that because you've already asked it before, which was kind of news to me, and so that avenue was blocked off. They have a scrutiny body which since 2006 has never rejected any of the Cabinet's findings. So, and there's stuff full of kind of people who just say yes to everything. We went to KPMG, which was, I think people find they're struggling as well, the fact that because we're mostly finance professionals, I'm not without wishing to sound big-headed, but we actually know more than a lot of these people, and we're kind of making them look a bit stupid. And I found with the guy from KPMG just incredibly arrogant. He didn't realise he's dealing with his peers, and he just try and fob you off. And it was clear, particularly with, I don't mind being told I'm wrong. I do object to being told I'm wrong by somebody who doesn't understand the question, because there were particular contract issues around what I do as a professional that I'd raised with him, and he just, the price fixing, I sent him the details. A week later he signed off the account, so he obviously didn't bother checking. And he rejected my objections, so in accordance with the legislation I sort of said, you need to give me reasons, and he came back, he sort of said, well, on reflection, there were a couple of issues I wanted to have a look at, so I'll get back to you on that. And then about 4 months later, well, they kind of had to think about, you know, how can we reject this, which I find astonishing. So we're going to go through the complaints procedure with them. And then with central government, you look at all the different bodies in central government, there's all these sort of safeguards that used to be there that have, in 2009, for example, there was a big investigation into price fixing, and there's about 100 contractors, all the household names were fined combined about 100 million. And that body's gone now. And you know, you go to the National Audit Office and they say, well, we just set policy, so we can't get involved. You talk to central government, well, if you don't like it, you can vote them out in 4 years' time. And you just go around in this big circle that people kind of like, oh, they're responsible. So I think that's the sort of where we are at the moment, and the conundrum is just to sort of how to push it forward and kind of make some progress, really. So that's where we are.
I think it's about trying to just get people to see what's happening, whether you agree or disagree, just actually knowing what they're up to. I mean, just sort of shining a light on it. I think that's all you can do, really. You can't, you know.
And it was the idea, Eric Pickles introduced this concept of armchair auditors, but he kind of swept away all the sort of, you know, like the audit commission. So you've just got the likes of KPMG going in. And I've found from correspondence that the code of practice says that auditors are supposed to work on behalf of the public and in the public interest. But looking, when you see the correspondence between KPMG and Lambeth, for example, you know, Lambeth is saying, what do we do here? What do we do here? If we ask those questions, it's like, oh, I can't tell you, nothing to do with me, I have to be independent. So it's a completely inconsistent. But you know, what we do is good, but it also needs the kind of regulation around it as well, and greater access. I mean, this is just like what we found is just the tip of the iceberg.
It is. I mean, you know, Lambeth's a very safe Labour borough. I mean, you know, I don't know what it would take to get people in Lambeth not to vote Labour. I mean, there had to be, you know, I just have no idea. So people are going to vote Labour regardless, and I don't know how you get over people that they're idiots, and you know.
We've worked with these guys a few times on looking at debt, and in particular local government debt in Scotland, and I just wanted to kind of add a couple of things about that to give a context overall, because local government debt in Scotland is pretty much the same as in England and Wales and probably in Spain and various other parts of the world. Now, you mentioned the Audit Commission in England. I think, if I'm right in saying, I think that we still have Audit Scotland in Scotland, which is the Audit Commission for Scotland. So we still have a kind of national auditor that will come in and look at local authorities. They do regular reports, and I was just kind of online checking a wee report that they did most recently on, it was in 2016-17, but Edinburgh Council, which I technically represent, I guess, we had, at the time we did the local government paper, it was the debt interest was sitting at 12.5% of the revenue budget. So that's the budget for jobs and services. So 12.5%, which equated to about £115 million, was disappearing in interest payments only. The bulk of that was going to the Public Works Loans Board, and just to go slightly deeper into that, the Public Works Loans Board borrows the money from the markets, from the financial markets, from the banks and insurance companies, through the issuing of gilts or bonds, yeah? And the banking crisis caused the UK government, the Treasury, to instruct the Bank of England to insert money into the economy. This was like 2010, 2011, around about there. The safest way for the Bank of England to insert money into the economy was to, guess what, buy UK government gilts. So the country bought its own debt, but the local authorities are still paying the interest. and there's plenty of reason, this is why we've been trying to campaign on this, there's plenty of reason, there's plenty of justification, and it's an easy thing to do, financially even, to either cancel the debt or cancel the interest. And this is what we've been trying to do, because the interest is, what is usurious, I think it's another term. Certainly, I would feel personally it's odious, right? If you know, we've got a constantly reducing budget because of the government grants that come into the local authority, and this is every local authority in the country has it. Government grants are constantly being cut, and you gave a good explanation of how local government in this country is financed, but all the time the government grants are being cut, and yet the interest that is paid, and this is our angle on it, but it's the same with the Lobos and stuff, the interest that's been paid has not been cut. And that interest is actually, it's another form of taxation, and it's taxing our local authorities. Now our local authorities, most of the poorest people in the country usually have got more dependency on local authorities. And a councillor I was speaking to recently informed us that the Edinburgh Council has 20,000 council houses for rent, and something like 90% of the tenants in Edinburgh Council houses are vulnerable, classed as vulnerable. It means that they may have learning difficulties, they're definitely poor, unemployed, so on and so forth. So they're technically vulnerable people, and we're cutting the money that we give to local authorities, at the same time still insisting that we pay the interest. So where is the money coming from? It's coming from the jobs and services. Yes, it's the same. It's the same in every council. I'm just using Edinburgh as an example because it's the one that I know best. Yeah, but it's the same in every local authority across this country, and I would imagine in Spain and Greece too.
Yeah, it's just like, how did you get? Yeah, so so you basically crowdsourced. You put it out there that you're going to go after the top bank at IMF with MEs.
Yeah, well, very briefly, and it's something I wanted to say, like, we work on the assumption that it's all a big mafia. So it's legally constructed to sustain that, and that's why we took the step into, let's try and break it. So it's been done towards bankers, it's now been launched towards big builders, and we've also inserted a leak box into the City Council of Barcelona. And the concept is that it is as the citizens that can do it. And there are many workers inside the City Council that can leak information out that we may need. So this could be also an option, no? If you're finding a lot of barriers, no? Like, there's many different secure email boxes that you can use. We created our own, and we have instructions, so the sources can, with all security and anonymity, give the information they need. And it's incredible what people have, and it's incredible what people can put forward in our cases, no? So if it's something of interest, we will also share information you can give through, but we found it is a very, very, very interesting way of complementing works around audits, because it's also ties into the impunity issue and the fact that you find dead ends, and this helps break through, and this gives you small, big battles won that help out a lot.
So all of the things that you're describing was with this group of people that you said. So just like a few people. How many people?
It comes and goes. I mean, it started off with about 12, but I think people kind of obsess as well about corruption. They think they're going to walk into a council and find all this corruption. And in some ways, I kind of wish, like I say, this is a different type of corruption. We're not suggesting there's personal enrichment in a lot of these cases. It's somebody furthering whatever their political ideals are. So, yeah, it kind of fluctuates. It started off sort of at 12, but we're less now.
Okay, I was just wondering in terms of the links between the people doing the analytical kind of technical research work, and then whether there are people who are more involved in the dissemination or the sort of publicising of what you're doing? I mean, I know that, for example, in the examples that you were giving, the public awareness campaign aspect is a really strong component. So I just wasn't sure from when you were just describing your activities.
I feel, it is a bit kind of seat of the pants with a lot of it. It's kind of, we've got like an investigative journalist and an ex-journalist, but obviously with everyone doing it in their spare time, you know, sometimes it's a bit kind of,
completely.
I would love to get more publicity, but again, I think in the UK as well, particularly where we are in Lambeth, the local press will never. 10 years ago, them and Lambeth absolutely hated each other because Lambeth wouldn't give them advertising, and one of their journalists about 10 years ago, like, beat up the mayor. But now and you would get good stories 10 years ago, but now they've started taking advertising, and all they do now is just they won't touch us with a barge pole, and they just recycle kind of press releases from the council. I was interested in you talk about the whistleblowers, because what we've found, they're not very clever, but we found the councillor kind of trying to, well, firstly we found that council officers are leaking information to the councillors about us to try and kind of rubbish what we say, and they're also kind of like, you get an email and somebody will say, you know, can we talk over the phone? Is there a phone number you can have? And you kind of Google, and there's like the person's name, you know, shaking hands with the leader of the council, and so it's kind of, they're trying to sort of plant people to sort of try and sort of trip us up, and we found people are asking FOIs about us, so there's a lot of dirty tricks going on to sort of try and, you know, I'm very sort of proud of what we've done, and you know, we maintain that we're professional, we're not anything to do with politics, and it's really quite frightening. I had a phone call from a journalist, and she sort of said, well, I'm writing this piece, but I've been told by my editor to be careful because you might be a political front group, and they just sling all this mud. They've got no evidence at all. You know, Lambeth is just as a bit of history, it's for decades it's always been known as being kind of inept, corrupt, and for decades there was child abuse going on, even within the town hall, people think, and there's been a big inquiry, and you know, there's been people who've died in mysterious circumstances, and so there's a lot of secrets in there that, you know, people don't want to kind of let out.
I think there are two clues. One, that the leaks are anonymous and completely secure for those who leak. And two, a good communication campaign. So they are the ones under attack, because when they are the ones under attack, media at the pressure, they don't have the time or they're not in a position to go after you when they are under the spotlight.
They have a big communications team. This is the thing we find as well, is like, you know, they're closing libraries down, but they have like PR people. They sent the last public meeting. Because it's the ultimate battle, communication. They had like a press officer at the back of the meeting, and
what we've done is training around the country in comms for movements, so we can all upscale and be as or better than them, and that's really important.
I mean, the conversations we've done a bit, but it was like a direct response to Brian's point about Scottish local government debt. And I think one of the things we've found, which is probably worth mentioning, is although government has these kind of two options of borrowing, one from like local councils have got the chance to borrow from central government or from private banks, even though you think borrowing from government they'll be relatively protected, what we've found particularly in places like Scotland and Wales is that the interest rates that the councils pay is actually set by the Chancellor, so it's like a political decision made by effectively the Treasury. And so when you look at the types of interest rates that different councils are paying based on who controls the council, is it Conservative, is it Labour, is it Scottish National Party, is it Plaid Cymru, what we've sort of found when you map that on a chart is that the Conservative councils generally pay the kind of lowest rates of interest. Labour councils typically pay the highest rates of interest.
That's crazy.
If you're in Scotland, if you're in Wales, if you're in like a devolved region, you'll pay an even higher rate of interest. And so like, I think the second highest rate we found was like, I think it's East Dunbartonshire. Yeah, so I mean, you find it, and it's insane. So I mean, like, and the issue is like none of these councils, I mean, they share the same sovereign credit rating as UK government, which was until recently AAA, now AA rating. So there should be really no differential in interest rate they pay, but there's an enormous one. And so we kind of put out a press release about this. We kind of like let a lot of MPs know about it. We let different political parties know about it, and nobody has said a word about it. Even though the fact that you can point to councils paying like 2 or 3% more for loans taken out at the same time, just because they're a different political party. And I think that's just again exposes the fact that it's not just the markets that are the problem. It's the fact we've got corruption of process in the state, which allows for political favouritism in terms of how money is kind of linked to municipalities.
Just to very quickly add into that, we've had about 3 councils, Edinburgh, Fife, and I think it's North Lanarkshire, that cut their logo debt as a result of this by about 2 million each. Yeah. So they shaved some of the logo debt off. They didn't touch the public works loans book there. They're terrified of that.
Right.